Okay. Good morning, y'all. Welcome to Pluralism program. It is pluralism or gender pluralism. Pluralism is about respecting the otherness of others, and pluralism is in religion, politics, society, culture, and a variety of things, including family. When we accept each other and respect them for who they are, usually uh, most conflicts fade and solutions emerge. If it is Sunday, it is pluralism. This show is about pluralism in culture, in gender pluralism. And our speakers today would be MaryAnn Thompson-Frenk, Shalini Gupta, Dr. Nyla Ali Khan, Dr. Ida Jones, and myself. And the speakers' bios are at the link provided to you. And the program video will be posted on YouTube. All you have to do is go to youtube.com and plug in Center for Pluralism and you get the channel. And let me share my perspective on this for about 7 or 8 minutes. Then I will go to Dr. Ida Jones, Dr. Nyla Khan, and Shalini Gupta and MaryAnn Thompson-Frenk. Let me share my perspective. It is embarrassing, really embarrassing to think that 100 years ago, women were considered men's property and were required to be obedient and subservient to men. Thank God for the women's liberation movement. That narrative is changed over the last 100 years. Now men and women are equal in their minds, hearts, souls, and all aspects of life. But in practice, it is not 100% there. We are not perfect there. We have to achieve that. This is our effort. We have come a long way, but no more. However, at this time, humanity has almost reached the pinnacle of civilization. At least most men in America consider all humans, men and women, as equal in their thoughts, assumptions, talks, and actions. This process began with the passage of Women's Suffrage Act in 1919. I'm not going to go into details because our speakers will share information about that. When women were started allowed to vote in the United States. Now let's talk about 2020. It was a jubilation when Geraldine Ferraro was nominated as the first vice president of the United States. Of course, she did not make it. Then came Hillary Clinton. She didn't make it. I have heard a few men saying that they would not accept a woman president. It was very disgusting to hear that. And thanks to the Democratic Party and Joe Biden. By the way, I'm not a Democrat, not a Republican. I'm an independent. And thanks to the party and the Joe Biden for nominating Kamala Harris. Now she's the vice president-elect of the United States. We are very proud of this significant accomplishment on the 100th year of women's progress. It is a hard-fought journey of 100 years. As Americans, we are the most advanced culture in every aspect of life, but misogyny. Let me share, throughout the ages, from the beginning of the mankind, women have gone through tremendous tensions and humiliation by none other than their own loved ones, parents, husbands, siblings, and even their own children. Let me share a few quick examples. The most disgusting act of some men is their attitude towards women. And they feel they are entitled to them, especially towards friendly women. You have seen our president, Hollywood moguls, corporate execs, senators, and congressmen. Idiots they are. This attitude of entitlement needs to go. We need to stop that. In any group discussions, when a woman attempts to talk, the men speak out louder and try to shut the woman out. Somehow men assume that women don't know about these issues. I'm not talking about all men, those misogynistic men. In one of the meetings here in Washington, D.C., there was an equal number of men and women in the meeting, board meeting. A woman board member raised her hand several times to speak up. And the speaker or the president did not listen to her and kept going, assuming that she didn't know what she was talking about. Finally, I stood up. I stood up to make a point and I said, this is wrong. I said, you need to let women speak. They have some points. Finally, they spoke and everybody was silent and taken back for my saying. My cousin back in Bangalore, India, is a big time politician. He took me to a big political candidate who was about to run for a political office in Bangalore. I took my two nieces in the age 25 to 30 with me. As we walked in, we sat in the living room along with all other men. This guy, the politician, aspiring politician, he signals his wife in the back room to come and get these two girls back into the back room. And I said, no, they are sitting here right among us. They were the only two women. And they took a back seat. The guys were shocked that I was asking these girls to stay with us. I said, it is about their future. You and I are old guys. We are going to be gone in 10 or 15 years. They have 50 to 60 years to live. And it is their future that they need to be here. Then during the discussions, and I asked the opinion of my two nieces. And this guy was trying to silence them. I said, no, let them speak. And they did. And these are some of the examples. And I dedicate this segment to my sister, my late wife, Najma, and my grandmother, who were fiercely independent women who took charge and brought prosperity to the society. My grandmother lost her entire family due to the COVID-19. That was the Hispanic flu in 1919. Her whole family wiped out. So she had to walk 12 miles because the bus comes to that little town only twice a week. She had to walk 12 miles with her daughter on the side and her son in a basket on her head. That was my father. But she was so independent. Her brother wanted to help her with financing. She said, no, I will earn my own money. She made flower garlands and she went to the bus stop and sold the flowers to them. That is my humble background. And she raised my father and his sister. My father went on to become the mayor of the town. And I know a few more women in my town, single women. They cooked breakfast items in their home and opened the door and people would come and buy. With that income, they raised their son and he became the top ranking engineer in Bangalore University. And there are many single women who manage so effectively going to work, taking their children to the school, soccer playground and doing different things. And yet I know a woman in Louisville, Kentucky, she raised three of her sons. Two of them are doctors and one of them is an attorney. So there are many, many examples of women's achievements. It has not, and again, it has nothing to do with the misogyny, has nothing to do with religion or nationality. It is pervasive among all societies, all cultures. Thank God for America. Thank God for America. All of that is going away. We have come a long way and have more to go, where men feel, think, believe, and act as equals. The stinky male attitude of entitlement. What does she know? And the desire to dictate how a woman should behave has got to go. All of us have to work to get rid of that attitude. When a society respects equality, Together, we can bring good things to life and to the society. All of us become productive. Nation can double its production when we treat, believe, feel, act, think, and act like equals. With that, my friends, I will go to, I think we have, MaryAnn has not joined yet. So let's say I will start with Dr. Nyla Ali Khan. I'm sorry, I had um, first person to be Dr. Ida Jones. I'm going to introduce Ida Jones, and then she has got 15 minutes to share the women's progress of 100 years and where we are, and particularly the women's contribution, the African American women's contribution towards making this society great. Dr. Ida Jones is a historian, archivist, and an author. Her 4 books explore the lives of African American men and women through utilizing their collections. In August 2010, she shared a platform as a moderator with Dr. Rosalind Penn at the 90th anniversary of the suffrage movement. That was 10 years ago. In tribute to Dr. Penn, she promotes the unique history of Black women in the suffrage movement. Dr. Jones is a consummate scholar who believes deeply in Mrs. Macy McLeod Bethune's words, who stated, "Power must walk hand in hand with humility, and the intellect must have a soul." Dr. Ida Jones, the floor is yours. You have to unmute. Dr. Ida Jones, you have to unmute. Always, can you? Okay.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Ghouse and the Center for Pluralism, I believe that's the term.
It is.
Thank you so much for having me. Just in brief, I want to celebrate my other co-panelists and the audience as well for taking time out on this last Sunday in 2020 to share some thoughts on the nature of the last 100 years pertaining to the women's rights movement. It's very important for us to understand American history in the macro, that it has never been a place of equality. It did not start out that way, nor did it get imported that way, nor has it manifested itself in that fashion. There has always been a vertical relationship between those coming from various European countries, and then the gradations of color going in this kind of descending category between very white and very dark. So Africans are always on the bottom perpetually, and have globally been positioned that way by European imperialists and colonists. So that's a conversation for another time. If we kind of just distill the issue of women in the women's rights movement, white women historically have an issue with white men in terms of that relationship you talked about. They couldn't even sue for divorce or even inherit property in the 19th and 18th century. So there is a legitimate issue with white women and white men in that sphere, and that is something they need to negotiate for themselves. For African women and African American women, it becomes far more nuanced because they were principally imported into this country to be labor, arms, legs, womb, reproducers, and laborers for a capitalistic system that devalued them as human beings and desexualized them as women. And that had been the overarching theme that they've been seeking to dismantle or disconnect over the course of the last 400 years. The women's rights movement starts, they say, in Seneca Falls in 1848, when Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and other women, no African-American women, no women of color were invited to participate. But Frederick Douglass, the great feminist and statesman of the day, was included on the platform in Seneca Falls, New York, where they had a declaration of sentiment. And they modeled it after the Declaration of Independence, declaring that women should have the rights as citizens and as human beings to be able to assert their authority as people. And that pretty much comes out of the effort of the anti-slavery movement in the 1820s and 1830s. So once again, you find this kind of leading relationship between color and consciousness in terms of African Americans and white women, or white people in particular. So the anti-slavery movement starts in the 1820s and 1830s. It gives birth to the women's rights movement. Then we have a civil war. And after the Civil War, we have greater fracture in the women's rights movement, because there were African-American women such as Frances Harper out of Baltimore, Maryland, MaryAnn Shadd Cary out of Delaware and Canada, and a variety of other African-American women who were pre-Civil War free or self-emancipated slaves such as Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, who involved themselves in the women's rights movement. And the quest of the 19th century was the franchise or the vote. So in 1870, after the Civil War, there was discussion of enfranchising those individuals who are not enfranchised. And the question becomes, who do we give the vote to, says the power brokers? Do we give it to the Black men as a means to get Black men and white men who had no property the vote, or do we give it to women? So the politics does take advantage, once again, of the racial issue. And Francis Harper in 1866 says, well, I support Black men getting the vote because white women already have a voice and I have no voice as a Black or as a woman. So as a result, the vote is given, the 15th Amendment, to enfranchise not just Black men, all property-less men. So African-American men become the image of that. However, everyone else who did not have the right to the franchise, male in particular, was given the right. And that is the first time in the Constitution that we see the word male, actually it's the 14th Amendment, where we see the word male put into the Constitution. So it's very clear during the close of the 19th century that there was going to be a vertical relationship, not along color lines, but also along gendered lines, male and female. So we close the 19th century with this fracture between race, the fracture in the women's movement about the issue of race. And then we come into the 20th century, still fighting for the right to vote women in various pockets. There is the white moneyed women, because white working class women weren't included. White ethnic women were not included. So there was lots of fracture in the women's rights movement. We want to paint it as one great unified effort. It was not very unified. It was not very intimate in terms of its understanding of, quote, women versus men. There were fractures and sub-fractures within the women's rights movement that time precludes me from going into, but we can discuss as we go on. So by 1920, the vote for women to get the right to vote is passed, and the 19th Amendment is now enacted. The state of Maryland does not ratify that till 1941. Many Southern states nullify or ignore the federal law, seeking to not enfranchise Black women in particular because they know their vote would support Black men who had already been disrupted in their franchise. So when we look at that, we know that African-American women will not get the full right to vote until 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. We have to look at Indigenous women, Native American women. They were not allowed to vote in 1920 either until 1924 with the Snyder Act, which basically gave them the right to citizenship. But it's not until 1962 that that is basically enforced. Asian American women also face similar kinds of disfranchisement because of the question of their loyalty and their citizenship. It is not until 1952 that they're allowed to get access to, quote, citizenship and be allowed to vote. Latina women also face a very similar situation, Puerto Rican women in particular, in terms of questioning their citizenship, not just their patriotism or their origin of birth, but their citizenship. So it's not going to be till the 1930s, by 1975, when the Voting Rights Act goes broader and includes all women of color or all persons of color who had been disrupted in the franchise. So in brief, just to share time with other panelists, there has been a consistent struggle and an ongoing struggle for African-American women in general and African-American people in the macro to be included. Oddly enough, we're going to have Charlotta Bass in 1952 running as vice presidential candidate on a progressive platform out of California. Then we're going to have Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman as well, to run for a Democratic nomination as president in 1972. And then we're going to see a constellation of other women going into Senate, Congress, mayors, governors, and such like that, up to Stacey Abrams and her defeated effort in Georgia. So African-American people have always sought to be patriotic and included themselves, but there's always been a sinister underlying undertow to basically extract them from the conversation. So America has been a xenophobic country. It has said one thing in terms of its rhetoric, but it has lived something else in terms of its policy. So there is where the fracture and the friction comes. And hopefully these kinds of conversations will unpack that and allow us to see the humanity in each other and move forward as civilized beings. Thank you.
Dr. Mike, you need to unmute. You're muted.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, yes.
I would ask my fellow panelists to ask one or two questions to Dr. Ida Jones. That was a great history you shared, Dr. Jones, and that is a history some of us are not aware of it, and thanks for enlightening about that issue. And I'm glad you mentioned, I thought Geraldine Ferraro was the first person to be nominated, but I think you brought two more names, and I'm glad to hear that as a record. Thank you. Let's say we'll go to now. I will now introduce Shalini Gupta, and she will share her point of view about the where the women are in terms of freedom and acceptability as equals. Shalini Gupta, so let's get speaker view on her. Okay, Shalini, can you join? Okay, Shalini Gupta has been a senior organization development change management professional in Fortune 500 companies, leading transformational change initiatives. Ms. Gupta is also an author, consultant, and trainer on diversity and inclusion. Shalini is actively involved in public service, working or utilizing her professional background. She is president for United for Peace, a nonprofit organization with a mission to create healthy communities based on respect and unity across differences. She is an ardent admirer of Mahatma Gandhi and his philosophy of nonviolence. Shalini hopes that the collective voice for peace and nonviolence will be louder and more robust than the lobby for guns and war machinery. And I want to appreciate all our panelists. I asked them to send me a 100-word profile, and everyone did exactly 100 word, and that keeps the time moving fast. Shalini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ghouse, for holding this very important session and for inviting me. Happy to join this esteemed panel. I think it's a very important topic. We can call it a 100-year journey of women's empowerment, but to me, it's a centuries-old journey of getting to a platform of equality, not just in terms of voting rights or the right to own property or to hold positions or equal pay or the right to have, make choices about your own body. And, the historians on this panel, can give you much more information on when those major first steps happened in our history. But it's the importance is to get to the full potential of being an equal partner in creating a development-oriented, creative, and futuristic society. And I would say we are still a ways to go from there. And so while we have achieved a lot, there's still a lot that needs to be achieved. And it's because whenever we are talking about change, a societal change, we have to understand a phenomenon called the culture onion. And it's the layers and layers that need to be peeled back to make that change. So when we talk about the culture onion, the outermost layers of the onion are the easiest, which is the overt things like the legislation, the holding of positions, the how police departments act, things like that. Your ability to legislation involving equal pay, your right to access to education. And then as you go towards the innermost layers, we are dealing with collective norms, social norms. And those collective social norms, your laws might change, but not every layer of the onion will keep pace at the same rate. And your social norms might still be lagging behind. And as you get to the innermost layers of the onion, you're talking about core beliefs, you're talking about values, and beliefs. And there we are getting to the root of the problem where, our core beliefs are so hard to change. And I think probably a lot of you who are attending this panel today are familiar with the term we use in diversity called implicit bias. So much of our bias is implicit, is not even, it's underneath the surface of consciousness, even for ourselves. And that's why for women and people of color, we use a term called internalized oppression. And that is when the oppressors themselves have internalized, have been taught to believe that they are less than. They have internalized those stereotypes that society, the rest of society has handed to them. And therein lies the struggle. The struggle when the oppressors themselves are not fully feeling empowered in their beliefs, own beliefs about themselves and their capabilities. And then Dr. Ghouse, you also mentioned another very interesting phenomenon, which is different for women when we're talking about gender in diversity versus many other aspects of diversity, because here we are in the unique situation where the oppressors are often people, your own loved ones,
Yes.
people in your own household, people, your fathers, your brothers, your own sons, your children. And conflict is easier when you have two groups that are that have no such intimate connection. They're not living in the same household, and you can have war and violence and conflicts, but when the conflict is in your own home and you're loving the person but you're wanting to extract those changes from them, it becomes a lot more complicated. So where are we now? 100 years or centuries old, whatever we call this journey, where do we stand today? And let's talk about America. We can talk about many other countries. I come from India, and it's an entirely different ball game there. But in America, we now have the first female vice president. But I'm heartbroken, Red, that we did not get our first female president. And so much of it is perception, the same behavior when done by a man is given different labels than when done by a woman. So a man does behavior X and he's seen as strong, he's seen as assertive, seen as a leader. The woman does the same behavior and she's perceived as aggressive, as pushy. And so how many of these kind of stereotypes played into our inability, our perceptions of different women candidates when they run for office? How much of that drags them down? And that's the fight we need to keep on fighting. So we have a woman vice president. We have women, we don't have equal pay yet. There are lots of studies that show women in the same profession as men are earning less. We have access to education, and the whole thing about reservation, that has become very debatable. When I entered the field of diversity in the 1980s, affirmative action was a big deal. And we were, there was reservation both in admissions and also in promotion in corporations and in the government and everywhere else. That kind of fell out of favor. That is a debatable issue, and whether we need to go the reservation route or not. But we have achieved a lot of the outer layers of the onion. But I think the inner layers of the onion, we have ways to go because of internalized oppression, because of implicit bias, because of the perceptions and the labels that we attach on women have still a long ways to go before they can be changed. And that is the hardest part of our work, is when we are opening up people And this cannot be mandated, it cannot be fought for, it cannot be forced. It can only come through self-realization. And that's why a lot of this kind of diversity work is putting people in labs, in situations where they have an aha moment, and they come to the self-realization about their own perceptions. And that's, you know, a lot of corporations have created workshops, and a lot of institutions have created those kind of workshops. We need more and more of those trainings and workshops to happen in our communities. So very much appreciate you holding this kind of panel today. I want to say one more thing about why this is so needed. Why is women being equal partners is so necessary? It's because we have 50% of the population is women. You cannot have a growth-oriented society, a futuristic society, if 50% of the population is kept subjugated and hindered from realizing their full potential. You will never have a robust society that way. Also, uh, they've been discovering that women's styles of leadership are very different from men's. Women lead in different ways. Women are good, and it may, there, people say that it may have something to do with the primary hormones. It's both nature and nurture. Women have different hormones. The oxytocin is a relationship hormone. Testosterone is a much more aggressive hormone. The nurture part is girls, when they are raised with very different messages. They're playing with dolls, they're taking care of, they're playing nurse. Boys, when they play, they are, it's rugged, it's conflictual. And so it's whether it's nature or nurture, women have a relationship oriented style of leadership. They're very much better at communication, they're team spirited, and they're good negotiators. Those are qualities we need in our leaders. So we need the female leadership to balance it out. And then you need the mixed groups, diversity groups, to be making decisions, because every group brings their own strengths. And otherwise you have a phenomenon we call groupthink. So to avoid groupthink and disastrous decisions, you need teams that are diverse. And women bring a lot of strengths to that team, to the team, and also to their own unique styles of leadership. So with that, I'll just say thank you again for holding this session. It's a very important topic. I'm as passionate about this, the women's empowerment, as I am of every other variable of diversity and creating complete equal opportunity and inclusion for everybody on this planet. Thank you, Dr. Ghouse.
Well, thank you, Ms. Gupta. I appreciate that. You brought out three key points, many points. Of those three, I can give some examples. Extract changes, you mentioned about it. It is important, in life, between family members, between communities, between nations, we are always wanting to change the other person. We fight between a husband and wife, they fight their whole life trying to change each other instead of enjoying the life and accepting for who they are. And this is a very good point. We should stop extracting changes and just accept whoever we are as we are. And then their conflicts fade and solutions emerge to create a better society. And you mentioned about the internalized oppression. I can share an example because I have worked on this for a very long time. Muslim women in particular, I don't know about others. In Muslim women, there is a verse in the Quran that has been deliberately mistranslated by men, misogynistic men, for a long time. That if after giving warnings, after admonishing her, if she still doesn't behave, they can beat her lightly. And this was a very disgusting translation. It is not correct. Anyway, that translation has been corrected. But the part of the internalized oppression is, I have talked to many women because I allow free speech, because I don't hinder people from speaking whatever they have on their mind, I had talked to several Muslim women in their 50s. They hate it, they resent that verse, but they internalized that oppression and accepted that if, well, it is in the Quran, what can I do? They accepted reluctantly, but that was wrong. But now that it has been corrected by another woman, Dr. Lale Bakhtiar, and it is simply means if you disagree, respect the woman or respect your spouse and separate. That's what the Quran says. But men had said to beat her. Now, that is a relief to many Muslim women around the world. This is a new found in last 10 years, and we are working on getting it broadcasted to all Muslim women who felt bad about it. And again, as you mentioned, I'm grateful I raised my kids, my girl and boy, a genderless narrative. And my girl, I gave her the hammer to work and he washed the dishes. We raised them to do all functions of the home unique on their own without giving a gender to the functions in the home. And I thank you very much. And I would ask my fellow panelists to ask Shalini any question you have. If not, we move on. And you can unmute and ask. We have a Nyla, Ida, can ask the questions. We will come to the questions at 1 o'clock. Everybody is free to ask questions at that time. Now let me introduce Dr. Nyla Ali Khan. Dr. Nyla Ali Khan is a professor at Rose State College, Midwest City, Oklahoma, and teaches at Oklahoma City Community College. Dr. Khan was honored by the Journal Record as one of the 50 women making a difference in Oklahoma in 2019 and 2020. She is author of several published articles, book reviews and editorials, and many, many books. I have seen 2 of her books. As an educator, her goal is to engage in reflective actions, working with diverse cultural and social groups, questioning the exclusivity of cultural nationalism, the erosion of cultural syncretism, the ever-increasing dominance of religious fundamentalism, the irrational resistance to culture and linguistic differences. Her unflinching commitment is to pedagogy, scholarship, and her unrelenting faith in the critical focus that education can build bridges across racial, political, and ideological divides. Dr. Nyla Ali Khan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mike. And it's such an honor to be a part of this incredible panel. Dr. Jones, Ms. Gupta, both of you spoke so well and you set the bar very high. So in my presentation today, I would like to draw parallels between the situation of women in my state of adoption, which is Oklahoma, and the situation of women in my state of origin, which is Kashmir. So I have been teaching in the United States since 1998. And every time I talk about the oppression of women in my classes and their cultural as well as political marginalization, my students think all that is happening out there in the developing world. They do not want to admit to themselves, they do not want to acknowledge that those problems are happening right here as well, in the developed world and in the 21st century. So I thought I'd draw parallels between the two situations. As I contemplate the significance of today's panel discussion, I wonder about the plight of women, not just in the not just in the developing world, but in the developed world as well. Women who have been conditioned to play second fiddle remain demure, passive, and not seek either political or cultural empowerment. I ask myself and all of you the following questions. Can women play an important role in establishing a more inclusive democracy and new forums for citizen cooperation? Can female leaders lead the way by offering new ideas, building broad-based political coalitions, and working to bridge organizational divides? Should women active in politics aim not just to improve the position of their particular organizations, but also to forge connections between their group's agendas for revival of democracy and reconstruction of society with the strategies and agendas of other groups in the population who have also been deprived of empowerment? Can women's groups in this way pave the way for sustainable peace, universal human rights, and security from violent threats of all kinds? So I believe
The
that
answer
the
is yes to all.
female population, all right, so I believe that the female population of the state of Oklahoma, as well as of the state of Kashmir, would be well served by campaigning for quotas for women in Oklahoma, in the House, the Senate, and the judiciary, an increase in the female representation in these institutions of authority with the terms of gender role expectations and legitimize a questioning of the normative structure. The intrusion of women into traditionally male domains, so politics, the judiciary, into traditionally male domains would cause a perceptible erosion in the structural determinants of sexualized violence. Such a form of empowerment would enable a change in economic, social, and political structures. I believe that it has become necessary to imagine confidence-building measures that grapple with traditional structures and emphasize the decisive role that women can play in raising consciousness, not just at the individual, but at the collective level as well. And women can give the marginalized a vision with which to redefine life's constituting parameters. The mobilization of women at the collective level would lead to the fostering of skills and ability of women to make informed decisions about issues in the non-domestic sphere. For me, empowerment is a process that enables the marginalized to make strategic life choices regarding education, livelihood, marriage, childbirth, sexuality, etc., choices that are critical for people to lead the sort of lives they wish to lead. It is important to keep in mind, however, that women are constrained by and grapple with the normative structures through which societies create gender roles. So the implicit bias and the internalized oppression that you talked about, Ms. Gupta. I was raised in a secular Muslim home where we were encouraged to speak of the liberation of women and of a culturally pluralistic society. I was taught that Islam provides women with social, political, and economic rights, however invisible those rights are in our society. It was instilled in me that Islam gives women property rights, the right to assert themselves in matters of social and political import, and the right to lead a dignified existence in which they can voice their opinions and desires, so as to act upon the boundaries that constrain social action. I have been motivated to imagine the possibility of different destinies for women in a world that is not governed by the aspirations and wishes of those women. So how can we as women develop the ability to organize and mobilize for social change? How can we as women demand political enfranchisement and socioeconomic empowerment? Women in my state of adoption, Oklahoma, still encounter lack of access to education. Only 25.1% of women in Oklahoma work in STEM fields, compared with 28.8% nationwide. Female students fare worse than their male counterparts in the student loan crisis nationwide. The report from the American Association of University Women, entitled Deeper in Debt, Women and Student Loans, found that as of fall 2016, women made up 56% of enrollees in universities, but they accounted for almost 2/3 of aggregate student debt. On average, women are more likely to take out student loans and to incur a larger debt in completing a bachelor's degree. Almost 44% of female undergraduates utilize student loans. Only 39% of male students take out loans. And women rack up an average student debt of $1,500 greater than their male counterparts. Now, to move to politics, female representation in the Oklahoma legislature is inadequate. Women, especially the poor and members of minority groups, suffer from inadequate health care. Women in Oklahoma face pay disparity, making 73 cents for every dollar paid to men. The wage gap can be even larger for women of color. Among Oklahoma women who hold full-time year-round jobs, African-American women are paid 61 cents. Latinas are paid 50 cents. And Asian women are paid 64 cents for every dollar paid to white, non-Hispanic men. Oklahoma ranked number 15 nationally in the rate of women killed by men, according to 2015 figures from the Washington, D.C.-based Violence Policy Center. As of 2016, Oklahoma ranked 6th in the nation for women killed by men in domestic violence altercations, according to statistics released by the Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women. So that's a little about that issue. I have more data if anyone is interested. I would like to move on to Medicaid. Medicaid expansion was recently passed in the state of Oklahoma a couple of months ago. But up until that passed, Medicaid expansion had not been accepted, and because of that, rural hospitals had gone bankrupt, resulting in healthcare disparity, particularly for women. Social services like rehabilitation treatments are still not as readily available to socioeconomically marginalized women who lack transportation. As of 2017, there are very few women of color in statewide elected executive office in Oklahoma, and no women of color from the state in the US Congress. So I'd like to talk a little more about health issues. Approximately 24% of women in Oklahoma have a bachelor's degree or higher, which is an increase of about 5% points since 2000. Heart disease is the biggest women in the United States, and Oklahoma ranked 49 of 51 up until recently. Now, I'd like to shift the focus from my state of adoption to my state of origin, Kashmir. In Kashmir, inadequate attention has been paid to the gender dimension of the armed conflict, and that hinders even further the emergence of peace, political liberty, socioeconomic reconstruction, and democratization. Although women of Kashmir have been greatly affected by the armed insurgency and counterinsurgency in the region, they are largely absent in decision-making bodies at the local, regional, and national levels. I recognize the attention paid to gender-based violence in Kashmir by scholars, ethnographers, and NGOs, but not enough attention is given to the political, economic, and social fallout of the armed conflict for women in the state. We as women, Kashmiri as well as Oklahoman, American South Asian, cannot afford to play havoc with the empowerment that critical intelligence gives us. We cannot afford to play havoc with the credibility that articulate expressions of our situation give us, and with the intelligence that we employed historically to create a national identity. There is an unwillingness in both Kashmir and Oklahoma to recognize the separate niche of women's narratives in the larger political context of both places, which is symptomatic of exclusionary patriarchy in both cultures, and which does not establish women's activism as an actuality and an ideology. Not enough emphasis is laid on how Kashmiri and Oklahoman women of different political, religious, ideological, and class orientations can become advocates for other women in emergency and crisis situations. There is a serious lack of a feminist discourse in political and activist roles taken on by women in South Asia and the United States, where the dominant perception still is that politics and policy making are linked to the powerful male realist, rather than the maternal negotiating woman. So as in other political scenarios in South Asia, women politicians are relegated in Kashmir to the soft areas of social welfare and family affairs. Women's rights and gender issues in Kashmir and Oklahoma remain secondary to political power. Today, in both places, women legislators and senators constitute a minority, increasing the pressures of high visibility, unease, stereotyping, inability to make substantial change, and over accommodation to the dominant male culture. Because women politicians are afraid of being seen as and condemned as overly soft and overly maternal. You see? So they make these accommodations, over accommodate the dominant male culture. So educated women should fully participate in professional and political life and not make a virtue of helplessness, as we have been taught to do, trained to do. It is no fun to be a damsel in distress. The reason I am so drawn to pluralism is because a pluralistic government can ensure economic, social, and political gains for women and marginalized groups. Women citizens should be accorded equal rights with men in all fields of national life. Women should have the right to work in every line of employment for terms and wages equal to those for men. Women should be assured of equality with men in education, social insurance, and job conditions. And the law should also give special protections to mothers and children. And I am talking about implementation, changing mindsets, not simply protecting women in theory, but in practice. So obviously, an important challenge is to create new openings for women to discuss public issues and to become active participants. I have a lot more to say, Mike, but I should probably stop with that so people can ask questions.
Dr. Nyla Khan, that was a terrific speech. I think I have to arrange this speech to be spoken at the Capitol Hill for those men to hear.
Please do. Please do.
And I'm going to work on that. And all of you, Shalini and Ida, your speeches, you are very precise. You brought all the points. And I think I will work on getting you guys, or sorry, you girls, to speak at the Capitol Hill. Some of the things you brought, infusion of in the male-dominated politics. It's such a good point, and it is still many males think, "What does she know?" This attitude needs to go, and as you said, education is the one that can change that attitude. And also, you mentioned about Islam gives women all the rights. Indeed, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was the first, probably the first man in the human history to liberate women. He is the first one to say that you have the right to own the property, you have right to own business, you have right to marriage and divorce, inheritance. Those rights were given for the first time, at least in those societies. But what men practice has nothing to do with what religion teaches. We need to understand that difference. And this discussion has to be in the discourse, common discourse. On my part, and my friend Andra is here, and we both, when we have other meetings, group meetings, individual meetings, we'll make sure we talk about these issues. And we have to come out of this misogynistic attitudes and feel, believe, act, think and talk equal. With that, I'm going to ask the panel a question. How does, for those misogynistic men, how does equality of men and women benefit this society? I think Shalini Gupta had mentioned it is missing half of the contribution to the, I would say, GDP. So I would ask each one of you, and Dr. Khan, Nyla Khan, you may want to start. How does the equality benefit humankind, family, and as well as the community and the nation? You may want to take about 5 minutes.
So I think I will. As Ms. Gupta pointed out, women make up 50% of the significant role in whatever direction younger generations take, in whatever direction a society takes and a culture takes, which is why it is important for women not just to be empowered in theory, but in practice as well. You see, women, unfortunately, Mike, in traditional societies for a long time have been iconicized. They've been placed on pedestals as repositories of culture and tradition, and as the ones who pass on tradition and customs to younger generations, which is fine. But in iconicizing women, their unique identities have not been recognized, and the unique contributions that they are capable of making and bringing to the table have not been recognized either. Now, as you know, I'm greatly interested in politics, particularly in the politics of Kashmir and Oklahoma. And women historically have played a very important role in the reconstruction of societies and revival of democratic institutions. But because they continue to be objectified, they continue to be sexualized, right? And undermined as well.
Yes.
The role that they can play, their historic role as peacemakers, is not recognized. And ways in which that role could be revived is not recognized either. The problem that I have with several women politicians in the United States and South Asia as well is that they are militaristic. They feel the need to toe a masculinist, militaristic line because they don't want to be pigeonholed as maternal. But there is nothing wrong with bringing that nurturing aspect to the political realm. And I think ensuring women's equality in pluralistic societies would lead to more holistic cultures, more holistic societies that are healthy, thriving, nurturing.
Thank you. Dr. Ida Jones, you eloquently mentioned about the contribution of the African women, particularly in Georgia, how they have contributed to the common goodness of the society. Can you talk about how the equality of all men and women, or all humans in a given society, benefit the society both socially and economically? You have to unmute. Always, can you unmute Dr. Ida Jones? Let me see if I can do it.
Thank you. Yes, I think that what Dr. Khan says does make an element of truth to it, but African American women have always been outside the pale of consideration in regards to working beyond stereotypes. And so the idea of the maternal or the feminine being soft or more empathetic works to an advantage in certain elements. If we look at Shirley Chisholm's campaign in the 1970s, she had intra and interracial issues with regards to her gender. And so it was compounded when certain Black men did not think she was aesthetically or culturally or gender-wise where she should be. So she continued to barrel on. She was an activist, and she saw the needs of people who were poor and working class poor people as greater than simply the shots they would take at her. Stacey Abrams is another one. After having said she did not concede to the theft of the election that she ran for governor in Georgia, she created an organization, and she has been mired in political cartoons in ugly fashion, as well as Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta. But they pushed past those stereotypes because the urgency of the need of the least of these is far greater than the aesthetics of how someone might demean me in a newspaper article, or of course the trolling on the internet. So I think for African American women and possibly other women of color who have been in America for an extended period of time, be they indigenous women as well as Asian or Latina persons, that they realize that there's always going to be an element of stereotype, and we can't defeat that because people are people. And we started this whole conversation, at least I did, on the xenophobia of America. So it's inherent and intrinsic for American society to kind of poo-poo the other person or to demean the other. And that has happened currently in our national politics right now with some of the behavior that's very juvenile and kind of childish. So we see that it kind of distracts, but it does not take away from the potency of someone who's driven to ameliorate conditions that people are suffering. And they need to have a voice of rational reason and collaborative work ethic to make things happen. And you see that happening with the squad that's now in Congress, and more women have been elected to Congress. And so as a result, there's one activist out of, I believe, Missouri, who was a nurse who experienced, she said, doesn't call it homelessness. She said unhoused. She was unhoused with 2 children, a single parent. And so she was part of the uprising with the murder of Michael Brown. And as a result, has impelled her to run for Congress. She's now in Congress. So she understands that lack in a very real sense and wants to bring that voice into the conversation with other individuals who may or may not know how desperate some people are because of economic crises. So I think women definitely bring something to the fore. They can be almost like a Swiss Army knife. They can be utility for anything necessary, depending upon their experience and their understanding.
Well, I appreciate sharing those thoughts. And now, Dr. Shalini Gupta, would you share how the equality benefits? I think you brought up earlier about the 50% of the productivity is declined because of that. So please expand upon that, how it benefits socially as well as economically to our great nation.
Yeah, so I already mentioned that you cannot move towards growth if you're keeping 50% of the population subjugated. But I want to talk about what Dr. Nyla Khan mentioned about the role of women as peacemakers. I think very strongly that as a society, we are really backward. We have not developed our ability to manage conflict. We're still managing conflict by blowing up each other, either through guns or bombs or anything. That is so, that is, on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a -5. And we need to teach the world how to manage conflict through negotiation, through sitting at the table, finding win-win solutions. We can't say that these are entrenched conflicts. They go back hundreds of years. They can be worked out if we use, negotiators are using it all over the place. They are using dialogue, negotiation, mediation. There are many other principles that can be used. And I believe that women are peacemakers at heart. They manage the conflicts in a family. They manage conflicts in the extended family. They're good at it. They're good communicators. They're good negotiators. And I think that when we bring women to the table, to the leadership table, more and more of them, as a society, we will start moving in the direction of resolving conflicts without violence. Violence is insane. To say that I have it's a lose-lose. And we're stuck in a lose-lose paradigm with our conflicts. You blow me out, I'll blow you out. I believe in Gandhi's famous quote, which is, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Yeah.
We are hell-bent on a path that is making the whole world blind. We need to get out of that that hole that we put ourselves in. And I think women are going to help pull us out of that that hole that we are in as a society. I feel very strongly about this. Thank you.
I agree with that. Now, each one of you panelists, thank you so much for quoting each other. And that was very nice that you followed their talk. And now it's open for the panelists to ask fellow panelists a question each.
So, can I make a comment?
Sure.
So I wanted to bring to the attention of the group here. So Annette Young, the woman in Chicago who they had a wrongful arrest. They ended up with an arrest warrant at the wrong house. I'm sure that you've all heard about that incident.
Yes.
While we are having this panel, there's a group of women marching on the police station for 45 minutes. This woman, while undressed, was pleading with the police officers, and they didn't even check whether they were at the right address. So today there's a women's march that they are, hundreds and hundreds of women are going to be marching and encircling the police station and praying and stopping and praying. So just wanted to put that to you, the attention of this panel.
I appreciate that. I think there have been in the last 4 years, we have seen the biggest movements. Right on the day of inauguration of President Trump, there was one of the biggest women's rally opposing his ideals. And then there have been other marches in Georgia. Stacey Abrams took it on and been very good. So now I'll go back to the panelists asking each other questions.
Mike, before we move on to asking one another questions, I would like to make 2 quick points.
Please do.
I would like to add to the point that Ms. Gupta made about internalized oppression.
Yes.
Internalized sexism. We need to acknowledge that women, because of the way we have been treated historically, because of the way we have been objectified and trained, there are women who have internalized sexism.
Yes.
Making it difficult for women to support one another across racial, ethnic, and class lines, right? The second point that I would like to make is, which you kind of brought up, is that we need to learn to draw a line of demarcation between culture and religion. And the reason I say this is because in predominantly Muslim societies and other societies as well, there are some regressive traditions and customs that still exist. Unfortunately, people conflate those regressive customs and traditions with religion. People assume that religion sanctions those regressive traditions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Whereas it doesn't. So it's important because Islamophobia is a reality in the United States. It is a reality among women's groups as well, not just men's groups. So I think learning to draw that line of demarcation between regressive customs and religious epistemology is important.
Perfect, perfect. Dr. Jones, you may want to add a comment before we go to the questions.
Well, actually, I can go into a comment question, I suppose, would be to talk to Dr. Khan. And because she's an academic, the way we think about things in the university is far more idealistic than it is in the practical terms. So I would like to know, in terms of building out this understanding, how do you perceive, let's say in the next 10 or 15 years, as we look at the birth rates globally, women are outpacing, or female births are outpacing male births. So there's going to be a majority of women on the planet, if it not already, then in the next 10 or 15 years. So how do you see the intra-gendered strife among women with some of this cultural baggage, religious baggage and such being mediated to benefit the large society? How do you see that happening?
You know, that's an excellent question, and that's a very difficult question as well, because ideally, I would like to see women take their place at the table. I would like to see women make a significant change in the political realm, which continues to be patriarchal. And I would like privileged women, educated women, to act as resource managers and advocates for those that remain disempowered because of race, ethnicity, class. I don't really know how that would play out, but I'll tell you what I have been doing at my end, Dr. Jones. In addition to teaching at universities and colleges, I have been very involved in activism as well. So as an Oklahoma humanities scholar, I have been going to women's correctional facilities across the state of Oklahoma to talk with female inmates. And Oklahoma Humanities initiated a program called Let's Talk About It Oklahoma, you know, enabling their scholars to go to correctional facilities to interact with female inmates who were there for different reasons. So some of them were abused for the longest time and killed their abusers, their intimate partners, which is why they are now in prison. Others for drug possession, etc. Several, of course, you know, the women at correctional facilities in Oklahoma are overwhelmingly African American and overwhelmingly poor as well. So I believe that it is important for me to do, in addition to teaching, it is important for me to be involved in outreach work. It is important for me to reach out to women across class divides and across racial divides as well. So we can build a coalition, so everyone can come to the table. And so that my thoughts and my ideas about progress, about change are not limited to the ivory tower, but so I can build connections and bridges with strategies and agendas of other organizations involved with women's empowerment.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Gupta, go please.
So I just want to make a point about individual identity and group identity. We have multiple hats we wear. We have multiple dimensions of our individual identity. I may be a woman of color, a Hindu. So there's a lot of different aspects to my identity. There are some of these diversity variables that create a very cohesive group identity, and religion is definitely a very important one. So I think we're talking about how women can band together to force changes in society across different diversity variables when they're not broken up. And you know, religion and some other group identity variables are so magnetic, are so cohesive that it's hard to break those apart and get women of all kinds together into one group identity. Somehow women haven't created that sort of group identity of all women. There have been efforts. The feminist movement was one such, the recent Me Too movement or the Pantsuit Nation and the Pink movement, all of these have tried to do that. But if we could figure out how to break down the walls of the other identities and bring women together into one cohesive group identity, I think that would be a really good step forward.
I agree with that.
Can I say something real quick? Dr. Jones, would you like to go first? I saw that you had raised your hand. Go ahead.
Oh, just very quickly, this might kind of take us in a segue, is that there's been a discussion of cisgender. So now you have transsexuals and others who are calling themselves female, seeking to, quote, join the women's movement. And as a historian, I never think there'll be one massive women's movement. What we have to agree on is what is the end? Because we're all going to disagree on the means. So what is the end? So the end, we would like clean water, fair employment, fair housing, education. There's certain ends we all can agree on. The means will never be unified. And that, I think, causes us to really quibble with regards to the means, but we really need to focus on what the end is. So if you want to drive and someone wants to walk and others want to fly to California, let's just pick what part of California and what time we're trying to get there. And I think that will be the most expeditious thing to do, at least with these younger people, the millennials and the Zs. They really see it in terms of ends. So they're not waiting to sit and negotiate. They're out there in the streets or making signs. They're kind of raised in ruckus, I would think, because they're not as connected with mortgages and other kinds of things that saddle adulthood with. But they know they have more to lose, because if these jobs don't come back, if the economy does not get fixed, if the planet is sick, they have the most to lose. So I think there needs to be a coalition intergenerationally. And then once we figure out the end, what is the end, then we could actually now see, let's just work towards that end, however your means are, just the end.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Khan.
Dr. Khan, after your comment, I would introduce MaryAnn Thompson. She has joined us. Go ahead.
Okay, Mike, just a couple of points that I would like to make. I just lost my train of thought. Yes. Okay, so as women, I think it's important for us to question monolithic categories. So for instance, the woman, the Muslim woman, the Hindu woman, the American woman. We need to recognize the diversity of women's experiences as well as abilities. So it's all very well to think about or talk about creating a cohesive group, but a group in which women's diverse experiences and abilities are recognized, right? Dr. Jones's experience as an African-American woman in the United States is not the same as my experience as a Kashmiri Muslim woman in the United States or in Kashmir, right? So it's important, I think, to acknowledge that we do not monolithic category. That was one point that I was going to make. The other point that I was going to make was I wanted to give you, all of you, a concrete example of a vocational institute that my maternal grandmother established in Kashmir in the 1970s. Now, my maternal grandmother had been raised in a patriarchal, conservative, Muslim society, but in the 1920s, she went to the convent of Jesus and Mary in Murray in pre-partition India, and in the 1970s established a vocational center for semi-literate and illiterate women. And the aims and objectives of that institute continue to be to impart intensive training to women in various arts and crafts, which would become a source of livelihood for them, enabling them to become better citizens and homemakers and work for the betterment of society, to run homes for destitute women and disenfranchised orphans, to provide supplementary nutrition to preschool children in ghettoized areas, and to provide accommodation for working women from rural areas. So, and the final point that I would like to reiterate is that it is important for us to highlight the groundbreaking work being done by local agencies, cadres, and social networks in various parts of the world, urban as well as rural. And in order to do that, we need to make a distinction between traditional practices that restrict the role of women and progressive roles prescribed for women within Islamic, Hindu, Christian norms.
Thank you
Does
so
that
much.
point make sense?
Yes.
Does that point make sense?
Thank you. Thank you so much and appreciate it. I think we have had some great conversation and great talking points from all the three of you. Now I'm going to introduce someone. She could not join earlier, so she's there. By the way, this program is being recorded. It's going to be on YouTube. All you have to do is go to YouTube and type Center for Pluralism and you get this. And I will upload this within an hour after this program. And if it is Sunday, it is pluralism. Pluralism is respecting the otherness of the other and accepting the God-given uniqueness to each one of us. And there is pluralism in politics, religion, culture, society, and workplace, and gender pluralism. This pluralism, this program is about gender pluralism. Now I introduce my dear friend, MaryAnn Thompson-Frenk. She's a renowned speaker, publisher, author, philanthropist, and award-winning international sculptor. She is co-founder and president of Dallas-based nonprofit Memnozine Institute, is on a life mission to help communities worldwide to navigate globalization's pros and cons. She believes we are more interconnected and interdependent than ever before. So we have to be thinking systematically or won't survive. She is pluralist in every respect. She has embraced so many communities and a whole of humanity without a question. She has done some fantastic work with the Native Americans communities from Hopi to the Mayans. In fact, she has bridged the gap, the conflict between Hopi and other traditions among the Native Americans. I have been a part of and a witness to much of her work with the Native Americans. And she has also embraced the LGBT communities thoroughly, and she has done many programs on that. I must add, whatever MaryAnn does, she does it wholeheartedly. She puts her heart, soul, and mind into it. And I also want to add a personal thing. My kidneys have failed. I'm on dialysis. MaryAnn was the first person to offer her kidneys. Unfortunately, it did not match. And I'm always ever grateful to you, MaryAnn. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike. It is such an honor to get to be here with such esteemed women. And Mike, thank you for being a man that wants to advocate for women. I think at the heart of what we're looking at, and first of all, I want to acknowledge what so many of you have been talking about, which I think comes back to empathy. And one of the things I like to explain to people is the importance of empathy in uniting the world today. We think of empathy as agreement. It's not agreement. I do not have to agree with you, whoever you are, 100% with everything, to be able to take my mind outside of myself and try and see from your eyes. In fact, I truly believe that the only way that we can help our world to progress in a world where globalization is due new reality, and when I say that, I mean we are more interconnected economically, ecologically, sociologically than we have ever been before. To think that we can go back from this and to become less interconnected when every single influence in our lives, and I'm speaking our as in our species, and our lives is growing at a faster and faster rate, would just be naive. So the most important thing that any one of us can do right now is to step outside ourselves and cultivate the opportunity to say, why does that person, whoever that person is, that is not me, see and perceive things that way? The second thing is to have humility, the humility that allows us enough to be able to, enough of ourselves to yield, to go, okay, just because this is very real to me and I'm experiencing this and this is my reality, does not mean that that other person's perception is any less real to them. Now, I'm not arguing about facts. I know that a lot of us have been very frustrated within recent socio-political times and saying, in the past, we used to say, okay, this is a rock. I might say it's granite, you might say it's quartz, and we'd argue over what that rock is. But we agreed it was a rock. Nowadays, a lot of times I might say this is a rock and someone else says it's the sky, and you go, oh, I don't even know where to begin on debating that. But So I understand we're in a very strange time, and we have to be sensitive to that. At the same time, I think that we can still get information from the other when we go, why are they perceiving whatever this is in such a way that I think that they're basically crazy or out of their minds? I can't even relate. Well, instead of trying to argue over the subject, to step back and go, what is it revealing about themselves? Because whatever they speak passionately that they are perceiving is revealing to me what they are feeling and perceiving in their reality. And because we share a nation and because we share a globe, it is our individual responsibility to go, let me try and comprehend that. So what I'm talking about when I say empathy is gathering information. You are only going to be more empowered if you gather information. If I want to, like I was at this place in Austria a number of years ago called Ars Electronica. It's a fascinating place that looks at emerging technologies that have not been created in mass around the world. And they had a map of the city of Linz. And if somebody wanted to put a coffee shop somewhere, they could go in there and say, show me all the data on the most productive coffee shops in the entire city. And they could see, oh, okay, it has this kind of demographic. It's located on this type of street. It's this. So you find all the top 10% have these things in common. Okay, now show me on this map where all of those items exist, but does not have a coffee shop. Okay, that's where I should locate it. So if we talk about this to each other business-wise, we'd all do that in an instant before we spend one penny. And yet we invest something more precious than money every day without cultivating a wealth of knowledge for ourselves. We go ahead and we invest ourselves emotionally, we invest ourselves spiritually, we invest ourselves sociologically in assumptions about each other all the time. And the sad thing about that is that only weakens ourselves as humanity. So we have to step back and go, well, what do I need in my toolbox to help me navigate this world and improve this world? And it begins with empathy. Now, when we understand that, when we come back to our own country, the great experiment that is America, and I like saying experiment because Thomas Jefferson, if you've ever been to the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., it's wonderful. And there's something on it where it says, it is our greatest hope, essentially, that our descendants will look at us as if we were antiquated. And when you think, why would he say that? Because he was a visionary enough to go, here he was standing for human rights, but he had slaves. He knew and saw with open eyes the irony and the dichotomy of the times. And that tells us that what America right now is, we are an experiment that is allowing each of us to participate. Now, our country will only work if we participate 100% consciously. I'm not talking about some new age consciousness, although that's beautiful. I'm not rating that. I'm talking about going through life consciously aware of how we are cultivating and creating our culture. Because we each have our silos. We might be a Muslim woman, we might be an African-American woman, we might be a Native American woman. Even within Native American people, there's a diversity of cultures. Even within African-American, people want to lump everybody together. You have Muslim, you have Yoruba, you have, Igbo, you have a million different things. You have individual cultures. Even if someone's Ethiopian-American, they might be from 3 different tribes. I mean, we make assumptions all the time. You see a Hispanic, oh, they're from Mexico. Well, maybe they are, but they also might be Maya. They might be Zapoteca. These are things that we don't take the time to learn about our neighbor. So when we start looking at the great diversity, this grand experiment, we can't be expected to learn everything about everybody, but we can expect ourselves to go, I don't know everything about everybody. That humility coupled with empathy allows us to move forward and participate in this great experiment with responsibility. And that brings us back to what is another great influence in the United States. Our Constitution was created in large part because it was inspired by the Iroquois Nation. Originally, the Iroquois Nation had 3 different houses of government, which we were inspired by. But what they did differently is they had one house, which was the judges. They had the chief and his fellow chieftains, which is what our president. But their other house was women. They literally had an entire house of women. And the reason they did that is they said a women can perceive things differently than men, not better, but differently. They understood the value of that diversity of perspective. Now, today, as a humanitarian, I got to meet with the Dallas Foundation. They work with all the different nonprofits in the local area. And this was actually a discussion I had 5 years ago. And they told me, it's going to happen. All these huge families with great wealth are coming together, and the people that are inheriting the money happen to be women. And what's changing is instead of huge buildings, people are caring about healthcare, they're caring about children, they're caring about elders, they're caring about the welfare of humanity. And that trend is going to be increasing across the nation. So whether we like it or not, there's a huge change of money that is moving into that. If you look at one of the rising demographics in our country that is among the most educated, is African-American women. African-American women are graduating master's and doctoral degrees more than any other demographic in the country. So this is telling us a whole lot that is changing. I'm not advocating anything right now, I'm telling facts. Right now, one of the demographics that's dwindling in terms of those receiving higher education, ironically, is men. So you see this very strange change. So whether we like it or not, women are going to continue being in positions of power, and we have to get along. What that brings us back to is things such as the Violence Against Women Act. A lot of people don't realize that the Violence Against Women Act, unlike other things, isn't passed and it's set. It gets passed again and again and again regularly, and it's changed. The reason why it didn't get passed most recently under the current administration was because the Republicans, and I know this is getting political, but again, just facts, they didn't want to pass the Violence Against Women Act if it covered lesbian women, if it covered Native American women, if it covered trans women. They had a whole list of what type of women they did not want it to cover. So instead of thinking, this is saying violence against anyone with a uterus is wrong, instead they're like, well, this type of woman, that type of woman. When we allow that differentiation, what we as women have to do is go, you know what, I don't have to be a lesbian to care that someone should not rape a lesbian. I might not even like her entire way of life. I happen to be a bi woman, so I have no problem with that. But I might be in a position where I say, I don't appreciate a lesbian person. I'm a Southern Baptist. But you know what? I also don't appreciate a woman being raped. So I don't like that. I don't have to be a Native American woman to say man camps that are set up wherever they end up creating, oil pipelines and gas pipelines, and saying, when they set up these man camps and they don't have any oversight, there's a huge uptick in murdered and missing Indigenous women. We're talking over 5,000, some that are missing. It's a going trend. At the same time, I met with a friend of mine who's CEO of a company that puts trains in. They have camps, but they don't have those statistics. I asked her what's the difference. She said, as CEO, I drive there regularly. I do random checks. I hire police officers to go by regularly at random checks. I encourage families to live there. As a consequence, no. Why? Because she's a woman. So this just tells you the difference in how living consciously and with empathy and going, let me be a responsible citizen and understand that I need to take responsibility for the other, even if the other is not me. So these are things that I'm just giving out as examples. Right now in North Carolina today, if a woman is beginning to be engaged in a sexual act, we're just talking kissing, maybe making out a little bit, it is now illegal for her not to follow the act all the way through. She can literally be sued by the man by not following the act all the way through.
Wow.
Right now in the camps on the border today, we have young women who are menstruating, and they're given one tampon. And if they bleed on themselves, they're put in solitary for the crime of bleeding on themselves. We are literally denying young women access to menstrual products. These are things that we are currently engaged in as a country. So we have come an incredibly long way. No one can deny that. I think about my mom, who is an airline stewardess, and I brought her in because I was speaking at an event with these high-level execs hosted by Women That Soar, and they were all these people, executive VPs in the company. And we walk in the building, and she just stood for a moment. She said, last time I was in here, I had my waist and my bust measured because as a stewardess, you had to have a ratio, 24:36 to be allowed to keep your job. And she's like, it's surreal to be here. And it was even more surreal to her to see this high-level corporate exec, in the company that used to measure her. And as I told her and my friend Yvonne Poom, who had the similar job, I said, what you all did, you fought so that someone like me can travel around the world internationally and make my own money. And yes, you had to subject yourself to being demeaned, to being measured, but at the same time, you were willing to put up with that so you could open and kick down doors. And this is something that all of us living today also have to really pause and say, thank you. So to all the women out there that are 50 and older, I want to say thank you, because every single one of us is standing on their shoulders. And I realize if you take it even further, my grandmother they didn't get the right to vote until 1920. This has been 100 years that we have fought to come to where we are today. And I think about what she fought. She lived in Texas before a woman could get married. And keep all the wealth she came into it with if there was divorce. It used to be a woman could come with millions, they divorced, the man would have the millions, she wouldn't have a penny to her name. These are the realities that women have fought so hard for us to get where we are today. And when I look at that, I say, well, what kind of ancestor am I being? How am I being a responsible person? Will I add to this great legacy of women who have done so much over time? Will I add and advocate for the lesbian woman, for the trans woman, for the Native American woman, for the Black woman, for the Muslim woman, for the Hispanic woman, for the Asian woman? Will I advocate for them? Will my place in history be one that is adding to the grand experiment that is America? Or will I just be another blip that went by and didn't do anything to change this world? I don't know about you, but during this time, we are more empowered than any other generation before us. And your phones or anyone that's watching this, you have access to the ability to connect with people and to get data and to have your voice heard faster, immediately, in a way that kings and queens couldn't do just 100 years ago. So
Exactly.
right now, more than ever before, we have this responsibility to recognize our actions literally are changing this world. So what do you want to do about it?
Thank you, MaryAnn. I had asked the same question to the other panelists. I'll ask you the same question. You may want to respond briefly. How does equality of men and women and all members of the society benefit the society, and also it adds to the economic power? Let me also mention a few things before you answer that. MaryAnn Thompson is the daughter of the founder of 7-Eleven stores long time ago, which they sold. And Dr. Nyla Ali Khan's grandfather is Sheikh Abdullah. He is the chief minister of the state of Kashmir for a long time, for probably 30 years.
He was the first Muslim prime minister.
Yes. And Shalini Gupta's brother is the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Nyla.
So he was the first Muslim prime minister of Kashmir.
Correct.
And then a political prisoner for 22 years. Returned to Kashmir in 75 and won a landslide victory in what is still considered the fairest and the freest election in South Asia.
Thank you.
And became head of government again.
He's one of the most respected people in the state of Kashmir and all through India. And Shalini Gupta's brother is a major activist in India. He's also the former Supreme Court judge. You want to say a few words about your brother?
I'll just say that I come from a family of freedom fighters who fought for India's independence. Both my grandparents were active in that. My father was the law minister in one of the regimes, and my brother is a public interest lawyer who fights for the underprivileged and fights for justice, social justice.
And I salute him for the work he's doing.
What was your father's name, Ms. Gupta?
Shanti Bhushan, and my brother is Prashant Bhushan.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Dr. Ida Jones, I just met you, and I knew Dr. Nyla Khan, Shalini, and MaryAnn for a long time, so I was able to tell about their background. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your background?
Surely. I don't have the pedigree as my panelists do. I'm just a person who was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to West Indian ancestry from Barbados and Jamaica, 1G on my father's side and 2nd G on my mother's side, and have been living. I was born here, of course, in America, educated at Howard University, and just really concerned myself with the African diaspora in terms of representation and unity and understanding of the collective oppression of colonization and imperialism from European and other entities.
So MaryAnn, back to you. Can you go and give a short summary of how does equality benefit the society in general and the economy of the nation?
Yes. I want to mention, I mean, people are always quick to talk about what my family did economically, but if I was to ask my father, my grandfather actually began 7-Eleven. My dad was the one that took it international and national. But both of them would tell you that what they were proudest of is they fought the Ku Klux Klan. They fought for integration from the 20s all the way up until it happened, at great risk themselves. They regularly had, unfortunately, or fortunately, anywhere from 40 to 60 cone hat people with flaming crosses in their backyard, threatening their lives because they believed in what they did. And he would consider that an even greater legacy than his corporate legacy. But one of the reasons why they did that was because they believed, and it began, and this is very relevant to your question. My grandfather was in charge of what was at the time called Negro Day at the State Fair, Texas. And that was because during the 1920s, it was all segregated and they had one day out of the year that African Americans were allowed to go to the fair. And as he worked on, oversaw making that day happen, he ended up working with a lot of African Americans that were doing exceptional work. And so that would only end up being for the fair. So he would say, well, you're a good worker, why don't you come work with me? And they would work at 7-Eleven back when it was Oak Farms. And over time, he would promote whoever did a good job. And eventually, my dad, being the oldest, was apprenticed, and my grandfather wanted him to work underneath whoever ended up being the best at different jobs. And often they were black or brown or yellow or Native American. And my father just didn't think about it. He just went whoever and learned from whoever did the best. And that really upset the Ku Klux Klan enough to threaten my family's lives for decades. And my grandfather was mystified. He truly was just thinking in terms of business. And he said, it just makes good business sense to hire the best and not worry about, because I want my company to do well. And that pulled him into the fight. And I share that story because I think that it's very relatable to what you were talking about, Mike, which is why does this relate economically? We do better economically as a community when we are looking at the best and cultivating the best. Pedigrees are only important when they actually talk about morality and values and ethics and what it's actually creating in the world. So I think it's much, I myself am adopted from Mexico. So, I can't claim a DNA pedigree. What my legacy is learning from the morals and ethics of all those different generations and what they fought for and what they risked their lives for. If I can't live up to that, then I'm not living up to the legacy of my family. I could make all the money in the world and I'm not living up to the legacy of my family. A deeply intimate way that I'll share with everyone here is the minute you say to the universe, to God, this is what I stand for. Be prepared to be tested. There are many times where I could have made a lot of money by tossing my values aside, but I wouldn't like who looked at myself in the mirror when I brushed my teeth. And that's, at the end of the day, it's just you and your accountability as you're up there brushing your teeth. Who are you seeing? So I would encourage all of you, think of economics as a tool. It's like a hammer. I can kill someone with it. I can build something with it. It by itself is not evil, but are we investing in communities? Are we doing what we need to do economically to lift other people up? Because right now it's jury-rigged for the very the top 1%. If so-and-so went to, shared some kind of fraternity brother and they went and played golf for years, when some big deal's coming up, guess who's going to be aware of that deal? And you got to have 50,000 to get in the minimum. So, the irony is everything is jury-rigged for the wealthy. So how do we start implementing changes that allow money to move and lift and invest in lives? And that's where we have to move, the social responsible investing and conscious capitalism becoming equally used. Because when we look at all the money in the world that is available, like this is what we need for the world to address all of our issues. This is what's in, in countries' hands and in nonprofits' hands. The way majority of it is all in private hands. So if we really want to make a change, we have to take the marching in the streets to Wall Street, and we have to be able to put our actions where our mouth is. So that's how we make that change.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike,
Now,
can I a couple of quick points because I have to leave.
Okay.
So just a couple of quick points. MaryAnn, I would like to say that I gave a talk on a book entitled The Indian Givers a month ago at Guthrie Public Library. And the book was an eye-opener for my audience because it's all about how Native Americans have influenced the world in a variety of ways, in terms of food, medicine, government, politics. the role that women played, the Iroquois nation in politics, and that was an eye-opener for my predominantly white middle-class Oklahoman audience. So we have a lot to learn from Native Americans, number one. The second point that I would like to make real quick is that while it is important to condemn human rights violations, while it is important to question militarization, colonialism, imperialism, it is also important to question the infantilization of women within our own communities that has been glorified for the longest time. So I think it is important to question the objectification of women within our own communities as well. And again, Mike, for which some people employ religious discourse to justify that objectification or infantilization. So I think that is necessary. And the third point, and probably the most important one, is that as privileged, educated women, and as women who have a platform and a voice, do we tend to place ourselves on a pedestal and portray ourselves as saviors of those women who are not as privileged? And how much of a problem is that? Right? For instance,
good point.
When some feminists write about women in Afghanistan, do they reduce those women in Afghanistan to the veil? Is their reading of the plight of those women highly reductive? And do those privileged feminists portray themselves as the saviors of those women, instead of looking at how we can build coalitions with those at the grassroots levels who know their local communities much better than the rest of us do, who are privy to networks that can be formed within those communities to redress problems and redress issues? So coalition building, as opposed to portraying ourselves as saviors because we are placed in the developed world, the first world, because we enjoy a voice, we enjoy a platform. You see, it's all very well to talk about how much we have access to today, but there are several parts of the world where women, even today, lack access to education, in which women who seek that access are demonized by their own communities. They lack access to basic health care, right? But we cannot reduce them to objects. So it's important to work with those at the grassroots level. And that will go a long way toward peace building, conflict resolution, human rights, etc. So that's
if I
what I
could respond
want.
to especially that last point, you know, when I was in Rwanda, it was very interesting to us because we took one morning to go and see the gorillas, and as we were leaving, we saw women carrying these, this stick with buckets on either side going up, and the guy said, "Oh, they're going for water." Okay, we see the gorillas, we come back, and they're coming down, obviously much heavier. And he said, "Have they been doing that all day?" He said, No, that was one trip. They went to get water. And we had with us some people that come in and they were ready to put lots of money into investing in small businesses, and they've doing this. And, the irony of what I saw was that, yes, unless you sat down and sat with the people and had the humility to say, whoever lives somewhere, they're the experts. The most intelligent, strongest people I've ever met have often been people dealing in third world situations. And I say situations and not nations, because we have third world situations within our first world nation. We need to understand that too. So when we look at those areas, you have some of the most resilient and intelligent people, because they have to be. They will tell you what they need. People come in and say, we have this idea, this formula, and yet most likely all those formulas have been tried and there's a reason they haven't worked. So having the humility to sit down and say, let's co-create. I have resources, you have resources. Your resources may not be economical, but they are from experience. They're from your wisdom. They're from all the things that your generations have known. You tell me what you need, and let's create this together. And not only that, but let's create it together where we end up investing in you to become the leader where you are and lifting you up. As a privileged woman, the thing that often that results in that is I need to invest in the PR shining a light on these individuals and their communities. I need to use my ability to have a platform to open a stage to give somebody else a platform. And so that's a very tricky thing where you cultivate allowing yourself to be out there to have that power, but at the same time, trying to find a way to use it to open doors and lift other people up, because every one of us had to prove ourselves. So going back as a privileged woman, I would say, yes, I'm privileged, but I had to work very hard to have myself taken seriously. How do I maintain that and open the door and make sure that that next woman doesn't have to work as hard to get that same, her voice taken as seriously, and make sure she's front and center, and have the humility to learn from her. She's someone to work with, not someone to give something to. We have to get that out of our mind.
Thank you, MaryAnn. Let me make a quick announcement. Let me make a quick announcement. It's 2 o'clock. Our official time is over, but I request if whoever wants to stay for another 15 minutes, we can carry the conversation. And we may also want some of our guests to ask some questions. So go ahead, Dr. Nyla Khan. You're going to say something.
Mike, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to leave. This was a privilege. I thought every panelist was excellent. Everyone made wonderful points, and I enjoyed this discussion. It was very rich, diverse, pluralistic. That was the best part of it.
Indeed.
Very pluralistic.
Indeed.
No one community, no one racial or ethnic group was privileged.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And you have a good afternoon.
You
And
as
we
well.
will carry the conversation for some more time.
All right, all the very best.
And
Mike, I
go
do
ahead.
need to leave, but thank you. This was an absolutely wonderful session, and really enjoyed listening to all the panelists. Wealth of knowledge here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ida Jones?
Yes, I can stay for another 10 or 15 minutes just to finish. MaryAnn's been very engaging. As well as my co-panelists, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me. I don't want to slight anybody, but it's been an honor and an opportunity to broaden my horizon. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. If any one of our guests have a question, please feel free to ask. Who will? Andra, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andra is my dear sister. She has been very caring about my health and constantly inquiring and keeping me in touch with her. Go ahead, Andra.
We all care about you, Mike. You're really an incredible soul doing incredible things. And it's almost like every subject in the world you're covering in one way or another, and pushing the envelope all the time. So I greatly respect that. I want to keep you alive for a long time, Mike.
Thank you.
So listening to everybody, the information that each one of you shared, and I'm not going to call names, each of you panelists offered such very rich information, very, very helpful. As an activist myself, I really wonder, because so many people are working on the concept of systemic racism now. And of course, we're talking about women's rights and equality for women. As an activist, what is it that you would advise somebody like me who works with other groups to be able to share? What type of strategies? We hear the pain, we hear the history, we know what we're in the midst of that is continuing, maybe not as openly as it was at one time, but nonetheless it still exists. What can we do about it to be able to cause some type of a change? And what is it, let's say, Dr. Jones in particular, what is it that you've seen throughout history that has actually caused the changes of the progress that we have seen?
Dr. Jones?
Yes, I think collective pain, and Dr. Barber, Reverend Barber in North Carolina, who's the president of the NAACP, with his Moral Mondays, has made that very clear, that irrespective of one's race, gender, religion, what have you, poverty is now a unifying theme in America, and that the poverty class is far more desperate in terms of their need than they are in terms of any other kinds of divisive points that we talk about. So what he is seeing and what he has sought to galvanize is that those who are truly the least of us in this quote land of wealthy are really the ones that are going to shift the paradigm, because they have children, they have medical needs, they have urgent human rights that are being totally ignored in America. So I think that what we're going to see in the 21st century is a shift from this vertical relationship on the obvious color, class, religion to the real kinds of have and have nots. And that chasm is widening. Even with the current fiscal crisis we're in right now, people are being threatened with homelessness or being unhoused because they can't pay their rents. So there are some real bread and butter issues that transcend party, religion, gender, and it's just going to be a matter of human survival. And it's gotten so callous globally, not just here in North America, that there's a global issue that has caused great problems, never mind the environmental issues that affect all of us. So I see the needle definitely ticking that way, that if we don't concern ourselves in an empathetic fashion, then we're all going to lose.
Dr. Sangeeta Singh, you had a question?
No, I don't have a question. I may have a comment. First of all, this was wonderful. All these three ladies that presented were excellent. MaryAnn Thompson, Frank's parents, lived next door to my very good friend, Deep and Honey. Deep and Honey. And when I last was there, she was probably very young. But two presenters that really made an impact on me, they made some comments that are very important to note. One was Ms. Gupta, who said that there is no cohesiveness in women's group. There's too much diversity, and people don't realize that. And the reality, there, a lot of you talked about very lofty ideals, and they are not possible because of this diversity. And there are certain basic temperamental obstacles in the way of women becoming cohesive group. And one is jealousy. I have worked in academia for over 40 years. And I started out with mostly men. And for 28 years, I was the only PhD person in my whole department. And now we have 7 of us, 50% women. Women are the worst enemies of women. They obstruct each other. They don't have problems seeing men competing or men doing well, but they have, if another woman, especially if she is from different ethnic background, they do not tolerate that very well. I have not seen Black women, white women accepting, I mean, there are, of course, exceptions, but I have not seen them accepting each other very well. I have not seen Hispanic. I live in an area where Hispanic women are in abundance, and they do not accept white women, and white women don't accept Hispanic women. There's all kinds of such stuff, and then that is in the way of women being really called a group. And so a lot of the talk that is done for women really doesn't make much difference, because we have underlying these problems that are in the way of women to be recognized as truly equal partners of men. Another problem I have with this women's movement, I've been in America since 1967, came as a teenager. And I was in the world, I came to Mississippi State University. I don't know how many of you know Mississippi should be the most prejudiced, one of the most prejudiced areas. I did not feel that in academia. My professors did not treat me any differently than any other, but I felt that from my women peers, not from my superiors. And also I've experienced more of this problem of inequality in the areas of not so much in how I get education or anything, in the areas of maybe more in the political areas. And so we have come a long way in the political area, inequality, but I don't want to take too much of your time. I know everybody wants to go home, but I just have lots of random thoughts of not agreeing with many of your presenting ideas, because there are problems that have not been addressed. The two ladies, MaryAnn Thompson and Frank and Miss Gupta, they touched on them, and I wish they would focus more on those areas if they want to do any good to women's cohesive groupness, you know. And also this one last thing I want to say is, when you start talking about Me movement or Black Lives Matter or all this diversity thing, diversity has become such a garbage term right now. And then what you're doing is, by doing that, you're already segregating yourselves from another group. And until and unless we come together as people, regardless of race, religion, color, and so on, unless we come together as people, doesn't matter what gender we are, what race we are, what background we are, and unless we, especially if we're in America, unless we call ourselves Americans and stop doing all this diversity overreaction, we're not gonna be happy. And we have damaged our country more with this overreacting to the diversity than to try to bring ourselves together as human beings who are dealing with the same kind of struggles and coming together. And the worst part to see was how we have dealt with COVID-19. And it has been politicized so badly, it hurts me to see how badly we are reacting to that. But anyway, thank you so much. And I guess my old professorship is speaking opinions, but that doesn't mean I know everything. This is just my current reaction. I might change it tomorrow.
Dr. Sangeeta Singh is a professor of psychology in San Angelo, and Governor Abbott of Texas has just appointed her as on the board of advisors. Thank you. Any other questions?
Can I actually respond to her, Mike, please?
Sure, please do.
Thank you so much. First of all, I honor and respect your path in life and what has led you and what you shared with us. Thank you for having the courage to do that. However, one of the things I want to touch on each of those things. In terms of women being the worst enemies of women, that's not unusual. I think we see that among minorities. And it comes, unfortunately, because you do have a history of people dealing with all sorts of challenges that were aimed at their demographic. And so people labor under the idea there's only room for one of me at the top. One woman, one brown person, one black person. And so that, you know, feeling is like fighting. I actually wrote an article on this earlier this year for a magazine, Success Sisters magazine. But the point I'm making with that is that having been brought up in a family that made it and was full of powerful men, a thing that I saw on the Old Boy Network is they would each take the time to lift someone else up, because they saw, if I lift you up, I empower my network. And that's where we have to get women thinking. And that's a challenge, but that's how we change that. Now, I want to sidestep to another topic. I hear what you're saying about diversity, and I've heard that argument before about it weakening things. However, I think that you can only build on a solid foundation. It doesn't matter how beautiful your building is if that foundation is not solid. We're celebrating 100 years of women having the right to vote, when in actuality, Native American women didn't actively get the right to vote until the 1960s. So when we're looking at things, we can already see, you know, when Alice Paul was leading women to fight for the right to vote. African-American women were told they were not allowed to march because they didn't want to have two different agendas, a racial agenda and a women's agenda. You know, when you look at the Violence Against Women Act, the women that were like, we just need to get this Violence Against Women Act passed, were very ready to drop off lesbians and Native Americans from the list of protected women. So when we talk about this, we have to be sensitive to the fact that different demographics have not all walked the same path to today. And if we want to unify, the way we're able to do that is, again, having the empathy for me to look at, for example, an African-American woman and say, you walked a very different path than white women, than brown women, than Asian women. And I need to be sensitive and know that history and see what individual circumstances you're fighting on. Because just for example, we have food deserts in Dallas. We have an initiative that used to feed 2,500 families a day. It's now feeding upwards of 5,000 families, 5,000 families a day when it used to be 2,500 families a week. That's because of what's happening economically. A lot of that is affecting women in their communities. We talk about the environment. In Dallas, we have what's called Shingle Mountain, where shingles are dumped in the backyards of a lot of single women, you know. And so this is, you know, it's not an equal fight. That does not take away from the fight of someone who's privileged to work in an academic environment, who's having to prove herself. I'm not surprised that somebody with high credentials would be more open-minded, because we've seen that as education increases, most people end up being more open and pluralistic by default. But when people haven't had access to education, they're going to be stuck in some of the old thinking and not realizing that that's actually hindering them. So I hear everything you're saying, but I also think that diversity and being aware of the diverse paths that different demographics have taken and are still taking is a large part of what we need to be able to unify women's voices. Because I can't walk beside and march beside African-American women, whether it's in my investing or it's in my activism or it's in my humanitarian work, if I don't recognize the unique fight that they've had to do, because all that history from slavery to segregation kept them from getting the economic background underneath generations that other races had the privilege to stand on. So, you know, looking at Native American women, same situation. We have to recognize, what do we need to do to make it more inclusive, and have the humility to understand that, no, my walk and the multiple generations walk to get me here is different. And how do I respect that and help make sure their voices are heard? I hope that.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Appreciate. Wayne has a question. Wayne, go ahead, please.
First of all,
Wayne is a newspaper editor, and he publishes a newspaper. Wayne, go ahead.
yeah, first of all, I would have responded to the lady who spoke to the group before, MaryAnn Frank, I think her last name is, but she spoke for me, so I won't say anything. I'll move on. Everything was great. It's great to hear messages I've heard before, but this time for more diverse experiences and with broad examples. But given all of that, how much value do you put, each of the panelists, put on including pansexuals in the next discussion?
Go ahead.
And to piggyback on MaryAnn, I'm not pansexual, but at least I want to be able to empathize with people who are unlike me.
We have to learn to respect the otherness of other. God has created all of us, and all of us, when we sense, when we feel, act, think equal, the society will have fewer conflicts, and all of us can live in peace and harmony and do more prosperity and progress. And thank you, Wayne, for that question and the response. We will close actually at 2:30 in another 12 minutes, and we will welcome any conversation from anyone.
I'd like to add to Wayne's question, or MaryAnn, you can go first.
Well, actually, I was waiting for you all to answer. Actually, I was waiting for you all to answer.
I'm just to respond to your answer, sir. It's real easy. Whatever you're doing sexually in your life, it's none of my business. How you work at your job and how you contribute to society, that's my business. You know, are you doing a good job, and are you being a good human being when you're out in society? What you're doing in the privacy of your own bedroom, that's none of my business and shouldn't be. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I think to answer this question, historically, the issue was not pansexuals being involved in 1920, although we know that they did exist. I mean, the whole idea of the pantheon of sexual options have existed since the beginning of time. They've just not been defined into different categories. But with regards to the idea of pansexuals as well, someone had put in the chat about why are men not involved in this conversation on gender, because it was very lopsided to have only women on the conversation. That once again, you can't please everybody. So you have to start the conversation somewhere. And I think this was a rather a great attempt to start somewhere to provide diversity of religion and ethnicity and region of country in this conversation. But we have plurality is so infinitive. It's infinite. So as a result, we would never be able to converse because we'd be constantly adding to the new dimensions. But to answer Wayne's question directly, the idea of pansexuals being this kind of alternate group outside of the LGBT community or the transgender community, they kind of are fluid and go across all of them. So I think if they choose to identify publicly about their sexual options, as MaryAnn said, that's not a principal lead in the conversation as far as we're concerned, but they still should be allowed to have the rights of a citizen and a human being where they're respected to be able to earn as much, be able to live where they want, and be able to celebrate themselves however they choose to in the public sphere. And I think America is so fraught right now because the dominant group, the white male Anglo-Saxon Christian Protestant, is losing ground. And like any kind of animal that is losing ground or cornered, they're going to fight to maintain those ideals. And as a result, we see that fight right now in the public sphere. So there is a lot to be said and had about this conversation, but the 21st century is only nearly 25 years old. So we definitely have a lot more time to see how it's going to unfold.
Friends, you're watching to the Center for Pluralism. And this program, if it is Sunday, it is about pluralism and religion, culture, politics, and society. Every week we have a different program. And this one is about gender pluralism. And this program will be uploaded on the website. We have a channel, YouTube channel. You just go to youtube.com and plug in Center for Pluralism, and you get this. And within the 1 hour, as soon as this gets uploaded, it will be uploaded on the website and is available to all of you to share. Thank you. Go ahead.
I have something to say to Andre.
Yeah, Andre?
Yes. Andre, that is very nice of you to say that what can we do. I have worked, I'm a physician, and I have worked for 10 years at the Department of Corrections. And I saw so much of injustice regarding the law of amount of punishment that is given to crack selling and to cocaine, 10 years as to only 10 months. And I was so much affected, and I even had one of my sons become a lawyer so that when you grow, you change these law, And fortunately, I don't have to wait for that. When Obama became the president, Obama and his AG changed this law and reduced that disparity by 90%. But still not just, but still 90% of it is eliminated. But now I think the most important thing I feel, and it's a criminal thing that is happening. People do not observe that. And because I really care about the Afro-American population and the Caucasian population, human beings in general, everybody. But the injustice that is there in the school system, the inner city school system does not have any trade training. Whereas if you come to a suburban area, like where I live in Prince William County, the middle school, high school kids are given the training in computers that when they leave high school, they don't even have to do anything else. They can make 50,000, 60,000 easily. I think this is the kind of training the inner city schools, middle school and high school kids should get too, the girls and the boys. And then this will give them some hope that they can make money, they have a trade, and the crime, inner city crime will stop, killing each other, gunning down, as if it's like a war going on. All that will go away if we remove this injustice, So we as women should try to find out how we can eliminate this injustice. It's to me it's like criminal. It's like water for white people and water for black people, different tap waters. It still exists in a different form. So this in today in the 21st century, a young child, Afro-American child in the inner city that are there, and they are not given this trade training and education. That's one thing. And I think as women, the woman can do whatever she wants to do. however she wants to do, anyone. Just like a man can do whatever he wants to do, as much as he applies, a woman can do too. It's not now, it is in like 1850s when Harriet Tubman, she escaped from slavery. She helped men and women escape from slavery. She helped so many people, she was called the Moses. That is in in the 19th century. So it is all up to us how much we do for the society, for our children, black and white and brown and everybody, what we do, how we remove this injustice, how we remove this poverty. So
Thank you.
this is what I would like to say, Andre. So if we can work and remove this and give these skills that they can make the younger kids. Inner city violence will go in Chicago on a weekend, there'll be 13, 14 deaths, murders.
Good
That's not,
points.
it's like a war ground. You don't have to go to Iraq to get killed. You're getting killed on your own, in your own house. So we have to do something as mothers, as sisters, as daughters. That's
I
all I would
agree.
say.
I agree. By the way, Diandra, I appreciate you. I chose to live in an all African American neighborhood. There is not a single person who is non-black in this area other than me. And thanks to Andre, it is her home that I am leasing here in Washington, D.C. And I am enjoying my life living in an all African American community. It is a beautiful experience, nothing different than any other experience I have had. Now back to our friends, guests. Anybody wants to make any comments? We got about 5 minutes left.
If I could respond to her, one of the hard things about dealing with these kind of issues is that people don't want to take the eagle's eye view. And unfortunately, if you want to stop the number of young African-American men, especially, which are the #1 demographic to be put in jail, the system is very rigged against them, which is no news for anyone. But what a lot of people don't understand is, for example, here in Texas, it's legal to make a prisoner work for free. So basically, slavery is legal among prisoners in Texas. And the most #1 demographic is a young African-American kid who was caught smoking a joint. Why is this legal? Well, you can go on YouTube. I invite people to do this, and you can see auctions. It's the best way I can describe it. I actually saw a video with a young African-American man put on a box, and a person, which I can only describe as an auctioneer, literally saying, this young buck can get you this many hours of work. That is, and there were corporations who were basically bidding on what prisoners they wanted to do their work. That is very legal in the state of Texas. The point that, and Obama thankfully made it illegal for federal prisons. But the point that I'm making is that unless we get rid of the financial impetus to stop that, we're not going to see all the institutions that lead to the maximum potential for a young man to follow that path changing. So if we want that to change, we have to change the schools, we have to change the kind of sentences they receive, we have to do all these things, and we have to find other ways for the American public to be willing to pay more for their material objects, because they're wanting slave created prices. I mean, that is unfortunately the economic vehicle behind the reality that your friend just addressed.
Thanks to everyone. I appreciate all the panelists. To my heart, it is a good discussion. And also want to mention that this would be available within an hour at YouTube. Go to logincenterforpluralism.com. It will be there. And I appreciate everyone, and also want to appreciate Uwais Aslam, who is in Calcutta, India, and he has an organization called Indian Pluralism, and he has been technically helping me in the background to make sure we have least obstructions and everybody got admitted, and I want to thank him for doing this. And always, you may want to leave your website on the chat so people can contact you if they want to. And I want to thank every one of you and appreciate this. And I think we have to carry this discussion one more time. There is a lot more to go. We will hold this discussion soon, probably within the next 20 to 25 days. If it is Sunday, it is pluralism. Pluralism every Sunday between 12 and 1:30. It is about cultural pluralism, religious pluralism on one Sunday, and societal pluralism on one, and political pluralism on one Sunday. 4 Sundays, 4 different aspects of pluralism. Pluralism simply is respecting the otherness of the other and accepting the God-given uniqueness of each one of us. I want to thank everyone. God bless America. God bless all of us. And may our society flourish, feel, believe, act equal with every human being. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I enjoyed this very much. And next time I'll tell you one more thought
Sure.
that I didn't get to share. MaryAnn, I really enjoyed listening to you. Thank you.
And the feeling is very much mutual to all of you. And I would request, Mike, if you're able to, sorry, my phone. I would request if you're able to connect me with the other panelists. I would certainly love to explore collaborating with them and supporting their work in whatever regions they're at.
Absolutely. I'll send the joint email with the permission of everyone to everyone so you can connect with each other.
Thank
Is
you.
that, Dr. Ida Jones, is that okay to share your email?
Perfectly fine. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay. Dr. Sangeeta Singh, can I share your email too?
Absolutely. But I'm not, I'm, for various reasons, I'm not allowed to be presenting in such forums other than be a listener or just
Got it. Got it.
uh,
That is your, no problem.
because certain conflicts of interest. So but I enjoy this very much. I definitely would like to attend again, especially when MaryAnn and Ida Jones come back again.
We will. We love to have the same panelists again.
I really like the historical count that Ms. Jones gave, because most that lot of this I didn't know. Thank you, Ms. Jones.
You're welcome.
Dr. Jones.
It is a very enlightening conversation. Thank you so much. We got a lot of work to do, and we will do. I am with you. Whatever I can do, as I don't want to call a man, as whatever I can do as a human, I am there to stand with all women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And Happy New Year to everyone.
Yes.
Happy New Year. God bless you all. Thank you always. Dilshad, that's my sister. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it. Thank you, sir. I'll log off right now.
Okay.
Dr. Mike, I have taken, I had logged in and this. All right. Thank you. Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
All right. Share me the Facebook, which Facebook you had. Share me the link so I can share with others.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Take care. दिलशाद सलाम अलैकुम मैं बात करता हूँ तुझे. Thanks.